you guys notice that in one of Trump's propaganda videos, he used this song? Does anyone else realize that? It's the angriest I've been at this administration, and I've been pretty angry a couple of times. You guys have seen it on socials or live on this program before, but he used the Grand Theft Auto San Andreas theme song music in order to push an illegal war that nobody's asking for or supports in any kind of meaningful way. I promise we're going to get into the Iran of it all over the course of the 2 hours here, but I've been talking about it relatively nonstop for the last 6 days, and there are other things happening. So I would like to start in Wisconsin before we actually jump into the press conference and the callback to Princess Bride, where the war is mostly done, according to the president here. And we're going to talk about why I really am not putting too much stock in that. And that may very well be the mission accomplished ship moment that we all kind of predicted that it would be for the Trump administration. But I don't want to start there. We're starting in the state of Wisconsin. Pretty shocking announcement coming from the Wisconsin Supreme Court here. Annette Ziegler announced that she will not be pursuing another term in the Wisconsin Supreme Court, putting out the statement: "It has been the honor of my lifetime to serve as judge and justice for the past 30 years. For the uninitiated, that means that is 3 terms. They're 10-year terms here in Wisconsin. I will be forever grateful to the voters who elected me twice in Washington County and then twice to serve on the state's highest courts. I am incredibly proud that in all my elections I had support from a broad spectrum of legal, civic, law enforcement, and political leaders, both Democrats and Republicans, who believed in my commitment to fairness, ethics, and the rule of law. I am also grateful to my colleagues on the Supreme Court, both past and present, for their faith in me by choosing me to serve as Chief Justice for 2 terms." Now, um, this points to a broader story taking place in our state. And if you're newer to the program, I refer to Wisconsin as the prettiest girl at the ball when it comes to electoral politics, specifically for the president. You notice there's not a lot of politicians swinging by coming to visit Wisconsin too frequently now that it's not a presidential election. But come 2028, we are absolutely going to be the most important people on the planet. It's the way that elections work, until at least the electoral college is abolished, and it doesn't look like we're anywhere near that happening. So, for the time being, Wisconsin, along with Michigan, Pennsylvania, and maybe one or two others, are viewed as the purple states, the swing states that can go in either direction and therefore receive the most attention and, to be frank, the most stuff in an election year. I remember during part of why the city of Pittsburgh, and specifically the region where I bought my duplex, has grown as much as it has is during the second Obama election. My region was listed as a tech hub. Today in 2026, there are hundreds of little software companies that all populate the eastern Pittsburgh area where I currently own my duplex. I actually worked my last job that I had before entering media was working at one of those small companies in the concrete optimization sector. But there were dozens of other examples of very niche types of software all popping up in eastern Pittsburgh, attracting people from New York and Chicago and just large Massachusetts or Boston. That's not a city, Ben. Come on. Um, Pulling in all these people from larger markets into our city in the name of having the opportunity to work at all these new software companies, which is pretty cool. And for those of you that have been following along, Wisconsin was designated a tech hub in 2024, specifically focusing on renewable energy. Thankfully, Donald Trump killed all of those projects, and we are definitely not paying for that now as the Strait of Hormuz is closed. This guy's a very big brained president that has the capacity to think ahead. Don't say otherwise, you'll hurt people's feelings. Um, there is a reason why we get this stuff. There's a reason why our infrastructure projects get greenlit at a faster rate, and it's because we are viewed as that kind of purple state. But there is a trend developing in this state that, if you're not paying attention, probably is going to bring our purple state designation into question here until at least the right wing side of the two-party system can figure out how to attract people in this state again. Now, I may end up with crow on my eating crow pie on my face come November 2026, but I don't think I'm going to. I'm going to be honest with you. Let's just do a track record of since I have lived in the Fox cities. We had an election that was won by a Republican in 2022. Senator Ron Johnson beat Mandela Barnes in the race for Wisconsin's one of our senators. Outside of that, it has been a clean sweep statewide from the liberal perspective, other than when you run the least likable candidate on the Democratic ticket without allowing for a primary. Um, Governor Evers won in 2022. Tammy Baldwin won even when Kamala Harris lost, which probably should open some eyes in the Democratic Party. It almost certainly will not. Every single Supreme Court race that has taken place, whether it's Janet Protasewicz versus Dan Kelly, Susan Crawford versus Brad Schimmel, or to be perfectly frank, the trajectory that the one this year is on as well, the Republican Party has become the party of low turnout, low propensity voters in the off year elections, very much what the Democratic Party was for most of my young life, resulting in a lot of the turmoil that we felt in the 2010s, to be perfectly frank. But part of why you are seeing two new candidates run in 2025, that being Taylor and Lazar, is because Rebecca Bradley announced that she is retiring at the end of this year, or she would not be seeking re-election. So they had to run a newcomer as opposed to an incumbent in this race. The same thing will now be happening in April of 27 as well, with the chance being, assuming that the Republican Party can't turn things around, that this could be a 6-1 liberal court, barring some unforeseen circumstances that buck the trends statewide that we have been seeing develop over the last couple of years as a result of some legislative decisions coming from the MAGA movement, i.e., the 1849 bill, i.e., anything to do with ICE, talking about postpartum care, whatever the situation may be, the polling data absolutely skews in one very specific way. Then, of course, you have what we talked about a week and a half ago with the Marquette polling, showing that there's like a dozen candidates for the Democratic side of the gubernatorial primary, all splitting very tiny percentages of the vote, with about 2/3 of voters saying, I need to learn more about these candidates before I make an informed decision, which is a mature and reasonable thing to think. On the Republican side, not so much. There's one guy. It's Tom Tiffany. And not only is there just the one guy, he's got name recognition. He's already in the House of Representatives. And he has a similar number of undecided voters, according to the most recent example of Marquette polling, showing almost 2/3 of Republicans not sure if Tom Tiffany is the guy yet or not. Our status as a swing state is absolutely being brought into question here, assuming, of course, Democrats don't choose to run uniquely unpopular candidates going forward, which is absolutely within the realm of possibility. But it's no coincidence that two right-wing justices are washing their hands of this matter. And to be honest with you, these are two right-wing justices that both ruled in favor of the election was rigged in 2020. So they're absolutely partisan hacks that shouldn't be trusted and have no grasp on what actually takes place in real life. But the fact that these people are not ride or die, these people are looking at like, look, I cannot be here for another 10 years during this, whether that's because they know they're probably going to be in the minority for the foreseeable future, or because they're anticipating some kind of broad shift in the way the Republican Party governs. And I hope that's not the case. I've never been an alarmist when it comes to election security or whether or not Donald Trump's actually going to allow elections. I assume that everything is going to be status quo because, well, to be frank, in order to take over an electoral process, you probably have to be popular. And that's not how I would describe Donald Trump's policies right now. But I don't think it's any coincidence that you're seeing these people drop out while you're seeing polling data showing with one candidate, 2/3 of the conservative voters in this state are not sure that Tom Tiffany's the guy, with a frustration for the number of the policies, with tariffs choking Wisconsin's economy, and so many other factors that it's almost impossible to list without having written them all out. But this is an important conversation to be having here. And it's just a trend that I'm noticing that I don't see a lot of people highlighting right now. There very clearly has been a shift in things since I have moved out here, at the very least, that I am noticing taking place. At the end of the day, I am a trend noticer, and I like to highlight these kind of things. But this is the path that Wisconsin seems to be on right now. Will MAGA and the Republican Party pivot, or will they continue along the same path that they have been on this for the last couple of years here? Only time will tell, but I think it's important to highlight that these trends matter, and more importantly, these trends are going to matter towards 2028 and just the kind of traffic that we get. I am not for a single second encouraging people to vote for a couple of Republicans statewide in order to make sure that we get funding for things come 2028. But very quickly, we are becoming a version of Florida up here, just the opposite of Florida. Florida is no longer a swing state. When I was a child, it was a question about what way Florida was going to vote. Now nobody cares. And it seems like anybody who makes a bunch of money is traveling to Florida to make sure that they can find tax havens, while the poorest people in Florida struggle more than they do in most states. But in Wisconsin, it seems like it's trending in the opposite direction, but nevertheless in a similar direction. That without a changing of the guard, without a change in approach, without a change in style, very clearly independents and liberals have made their feelings felt about the path that we are on as a nation and the path that we want to be on as a state. We do not want to be lumped in with Arkansas as the only state that doesn't have postpartum care covered by Medicaid for a year after the fact. We do not want to be part of the state where we're going to defund our public schools in the name of funding vouchers, where more than 3/4 of the money that goes to voucher funding goes to families that could already afford to send their kids to private schools. We're making it clear, and the maps are now reflecting a more fair reality that has people optimistic. I personally don't believe that the Senate's going to be flipping liberal. The Assembly most certainly could. This brings up a lot of questions about how the Republican Party is going to move forward. They're going to try and something trans. Absolutely. They're going to try and something trans. But I think you can only rely on these played out culture war issues for so much longer before people get sick and tired of the games that are being played without any type of real movement forward. The fact is, and I've broken the math down for you guys recently, in the last 16 years, there's been 16 years of Republican control of the legislature and 8 years of governorship. So, in other words, 8 years of a liberal governor, and you're trying to make it seem like liberals are ruining our state. It just ain't going to track with a lot of people who aren't partisan hacks. And that seems to be the place that we find ourselves in. So, another Republican justice announcing retirement. We will have another new justice come April 2027 with the potential for a 6-1 liberal judge. And I'm not writing off this election yet, but I'm going to tell you right now, it's been fairly quiet on the Western Front. There's been very little movement in terms of interest or discourse surrounding this race. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see it follow the statewide trend that so many other states have followed before it. Ben here says, hopefully pivot. However, how can either side be trusted on their pivot? Well, that's a major question that needs to be asked in terms of politics in general, to be perfectly honest with you, Ben. I mean, as a leftist, I've been dealing with it since Obama said he was going to withdraw us from Afghanistan and didn't, and the bank bailouts and blah 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 blah. Running as an actual progressive and then doing what he did, similar to what Biden did, and now Trump people are dealing with the same thing here. But the fact is, Republicans delivered on their promises. That's the major difference. They repealed Roe v. Wade and sent women around the nation into a living hell, especially in right-wing states. There really isn't a liberal perspective that you can point to that is viewed as extremist as what took place there, outside of complicit support for genocide. But of course, that's a bipartisan issue. So it's not like you're able to really point to be like, and that's why you need to do Republicans. But like, what I find ironic is the most outlandish thing Republicans point to in terms of what liberals are doing electorally is allowing for parents to decide whether or not their kids should be able to engage in transition surgeries. And the same people that are saying The government can't tell us what to inject in our kids are now saying the government should absolutely be able to tell you what you're allowed to do with your child, but not when it comes to vaccines, but definitely when it comes to these things that I hate. And I think a lot of people viewing it objectively just don't see it that way. No matter how much people try and paint Democrats as extremists in this nation, there's going to be voices like me highlighting very obviously that Democrats are center right Republicans from the mid 2000s. They don't run on extreme taxes. They don't run on ending the wars or defunding the military industrial complex in any kind of meaningful way. They're not running on Medicare for all. They're not running on abolish ICE. They're not doing any of that stuff. That Republicans will tell you they are, but none of that's actually happening, even though some of that actually polls pretty okay in this nation. So Republicans got to dial back the extremists. We have right wing states where women are dying of easily treatable diseases because they don't have access to abortion. We have situations where there's people sitting in jail because weed's still illegal. Like there's the extremists coming from one side, and you're just not feeling it as strongly from the other side. We got our first caller of the day. We'll see who we have on here. Anyone else wants to chime in? 920-281-1150. Nope, they hung up. Good chat. Nevertheless, there is an extremist bent to what is going on within the Republican Party, and states like Wisconsin that I do believe are purple states, that I do believe are looking for some form of pragmatism, just aren't seeing it. We got another caller here. Hello, you're on Outside the Box. Hello. Good talk. All right. Anyway, at least that's my take on it. If anybody other than this individual who seems to have called back twice but gets scared, I think he thinks that he's gonna get like a screener that he can tell me to bleep off or something, and then it turns out no, you're going directly on the air when you call me. Michelle says, if you're right about this trend, I'm here for it. But you're right, the Dems need to run some serious candidates that can get people excited to vote. Well, interesting you say that, Michelle. That's what my next segment is about, is some policies that are being suggested coming from Democrats right now that show that they are trying to appeal to Republican voters. I'm going to try this one more time and see what happens. Hello, you're on Outside the Box. All right, good talk, bud. Anyway, Jerry says some Republicans know better and don't support Trump or MAGA, but they won't say, they won't say so publicly because they don't want to alienate their friends or close future donors. I think it's why Mike Gallagher quit, or as congressman, or our congressman, and Reed Ribble quit as our congressman and Reed Ribble before him. No, I think I think you're spot on with that assessment, Jerry. I think there's a lot of people. I think that's why Paul Ryan got out. They saw the trajectory of how you were going to have to act as a Republican, and they were fine when it was cordially lying to the middle class and poor people about how trickle down works. But they were not in favor of aggressively name calling while lying to the middle class and poor people about how trickle down economics works. And so they decided they were going to bail on the process there. There's a handful of examples that I think are fairly clear. And for the record, that exists on both sides. It's why Jared Golden of Maine is not seeking re-election, and then turned around and voted to kill the War Powers Act in the House, because he knew that he was going to be a blind devotee to Israel and to never-ending war in the Middle East to benefit Israel. These were obvious attitudes. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party, as of the end of 2025, 8% of people approve of the military action that Israel has taken in Gaza. So there's Democrats, there's blue MAGA Dems that understand, oh, son of a gun, the lines that we used to use, calling people anti-Semitic and calling people racist, are no longer going to scare people away from calling out objective reality. So rather than pivot or reflect that objective reality, I'm just going to quit with the $3.5 million I've received from AIPAC. You're seeing this attitude reflected on both sides as the parties are kind of morphing right before our eyes. I've been saying this since you guys have met me, and to be frank, I've been saying this since the election in 2020. The election in 2020 ended, and there was chaos in the Republican Party. Obviously, January 6th added to that, but there is a big internal debate about whether or not moving forward with Trump was the way to go, or whether or not there were going back to a more traditional Republican attitude was the best move. And liberals were looking down their nose, being like, oh, look at the consternation shown by the Republicans right now. Looks like they don't know what way is up. Not like us liberals who have our heads on straight. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there as a lefty watching Bernie Sanders get screwed over twice and Joe Biden run as a progressive. Not sure if he was going to bail on us or not. He did. Not sure if he was going to bail on us or not as a president. And I was saying, look, liberals are one lost election away from being in the exact same position the Republican Party is in right now. You guys need to pull your heads out of your what's. Otherwise, there's going to be a bit of a reckoning. Sure enough, 4 years later, that reckoning exists, and now the Democratic Party is the one that looks like two parties masquerading as one party. The fact of the matter is, we are a country of minimally four parties masquerading as two parties, and then there's massive conflict within those two parties because a lot of the agenda of what MAGA is and what center-right Republican is and what liberals are, i.e. center-right Republicans, and what being progressive is, do not conform with one another. With Gavin Newsom saying, I'm not going to tax billionaires 5%, even though it would bring their net wealth down from 2 trillion to 1.9 trillion, because it will be viewed as radical. It's viewed as center-right Republicans saying Donald Trump absolutely encouraged that riot at the Capitol, and I am not going to be here for when he inevitably starts screaming that the elections were rigged in 2026 when liberals win. And so they are trying to conform. So, Jerry, you bring up a good point. But it's been a problem for years at this point, and it's been a bipartisan issue. Two people tried to call at the same time, so we're going to get this number on first. Hello, you're on Outside the Box.
Yeah, good morning, Ben. It's Gary calling. Say, I don't know a whole lot about, I don't know beans about farming, but I do know how to plant the garden and stuff. And I was just, you were talking about Wisconsin politics and the way the voting goes, and I just looked it up and I said, well, I wonder how the dairy farmers are doing. And I just checked the price of milk production per hundredweight. You know, they go by hundredweight. And it's what I was able to find is that the price of milk went down from $25 in 2022 down to around less than $20 per hundredweight. So that's a 20% reduction. So dairy farmers should be experiencing some difficulty on their earnings there. And I would also say they also shop at the grocery store and the department store, and they recognize the same price increases as any other person in the state of Wisconsin that doesn't.
1,000%.
So there you go. Check it out and see what the voting is and how the feeling is on dairy farmers. Not everybody runs a 8,000 herd mega farm.
Yeah, absolutely, Gary. And I would be remiss, and I appreciate the call. This has been a problem for farmers before Trump. The bankruptcies were trending upwards at farms under Biden, not at the rate they are under Trump. It's almost like one party maintains a status quo that is unacceptable and another party takes us further away from that status quo that is unacceptable. Then that first party takes power again and says, okay, so this new, even crappier status quo is now the one that we are going to live by. We're currently in that being dragged further away from that status quo moment in life. And Anna wants people to know there are billboards down by Baraboo with suicide helplines for farmers specifically, which obviously is a concern for anybody that hears that kind of statistics. Thank you for sharing that. We have a second caller here who's been waiting. Hello, you're on Outside the Box.
Hey, Ben. Good morning.
Hey, what's up, man?
I got a new phone, so I couldn't hear what the previous caller said. I wasn't sure if it was working or not, but it's working. I think the most important thing is when you talk about serious candidates running, whether it be Democrat or Republican, like the Democrats run or they talk about running on taxing the billionaires more, paying their fair share or whatever, which will benefit a large, most of the country. But again, here we are, dun dun dun. They're the ones who also donate to these candidates, and then nothing happens.
But it's not chicken or the egg, though, Ben, because yes, they do take the money from it, but it's going to require anytime some kind of tax increase for the wealthy shows up, the Republicans kill it. Now, if the Democrats had 100 people in the Senate, I still think they'd find a way to not pass it because that's the kabuki theater of it all. But as it stands, I used the example yesterday. Under Joe Biden in 2022, when prices went up, he proposed a windfall tax on oil and gas companies that are unrightfully charging more than they should be. And every single Republican in the Senate called it communism and didn't vote for it. It needs 60 votes. It got 50 Democratic votes, and then it dies. So, like, there's an effort being made. I don't know if it's legitimate or not, but there's no way for me to prove it if one party votes in lockstep saying any tax increase means we're communist China. So, yeah, liberals take the money, but, like, conservatives got to come up with something then if they're not willing to vote for flat out tax raises on these people.
Well, sure. And so Mandami, didn't he run on doing that?
Yeah. And then Kathy Hochul killed it.
I saw something. Right. But then, I could be wrong, but I did see some sort of chart or something where to the effect where he was saying, if he's unable to do that, then he was going to be taxing the middle class.
Yeah, I haven't seen the rhetoric. What I did see is that to your point, the liberal governor said, yeah, we're not raising taxes on billionaires to pay for any of this, which kind of highlights to me, I think if Republicans got out of, if like 12 Republicans said, you know what, yes, I'm voting for tax increases on rich people, 12 Democrats would all of a sudden lose the spine to do so. But I need empirical evidence of that happening for me to say it. My gut tells me it'll happen, and the Mamdani example is a perfect example of that. But until it can be borne out in reality, it's hard for me to say that this is a 50-50 problem, but I do believe the Democrats pretend to be the good guys normally.
Yeah, and real quick too, even people that I know that live in Florida, they didn't know that Ron DeSantis isn't running again for the governorship because of term limits, which I don't know if he put that into place, but if he did, good for him. Because I do think, term limits is also another, big thing that needs to happen.
You'll get no pushback from me on that one. I don't know if it was there before Ron or not, but that's definitely interesting. And I appreciate the call, man. You have a good rest of your day. It's he's exactly right. Democrats insist, and I'm going to be getting into this in the 10 o'clock hour with Cory Booker's tax proposal, but they insist on trying to find a way to appeal to a center or even a Republican voter, leaving the left behind, because what people like me actually want to see happen flies directly in the face of what their donors want to see happen. They'd rather lose these elections than do what progressives want and accidentally win elections. It's an infuriating reality, and one that we don't necessarily deal with as often in Wisconsin, in a more purple state. But again, Mamdani's policies were popular in this state after we did a show about it after he won. I'm very late to break. We're going to go to that break, and then I want to talk about a couple of policies coming from Wisconsin gubernatorial candidates, as well as candidates in the U.S. Senate who have aspirations, although not necessarily well-founded aspirations, to run for president in 2028. We'll talk about all those on the other side. You're listening to Outside the Box here on WHBY. By the way, for the third show in a row, we're streaming live on YouTube on my own page. It's obviously going to go up on Political Voices Network at 1 p.m. I'm just trying something out here. Yesterday's show was I can't say any of the words that I want to say. It did not go well. The internet was being a bit of a jerk. We'll go with that word. So I apologize for anybody who was trying to watch it yesterday and found it unlistenable or unwatchable. Even my show on Political Voices Network yesterday is only 34 minutes long because the video was just unsalvageable. Freaking internet. Is it because Jeff Bezos is wise to this program? No way to prove it, but probably. Probably is why it was happening. So definitely gonna hope that doesn't happen again, but I really don't have any control over it. So if you just search at Ben Cominos, all one word, and you need that at symbol as well, my channel pops up. Every subscription helps. So if you guys like this show here, just want to help support me a little bit, you can go ahead and subscribe there as well. At Ben Cominos, just my name, no spaces, no nothing. At sign Ben Cominos. I appreciate any kind of assistance that could come my way. All right, we received a couple of other texts, and then I'm going to get into these policy ideas. Karen says, unfortunately, I'm short of breath today. I don't know if you guys can hear that. I don't know what's wrong with me. Unfortunately, most of the farmers I know are those 28% diehard MAGAs. They do not admit that Trump is wrong. Well, that's a frustrating reality to contend with. That's absolutely true. And I really don't have any advice on how to deal with that. I mean, there comes a time. I had an interesting conversation with a family member of mine back when I went back to Pittsburgh for Christmas. And he was like, there comes a time when you've said your piece and you've said all you can say, and people are going to make their own decisions. And I struggle with giving up on people even when they are obstinate. But I will admit it's a skill I'm getting better at. But I get your frustration, Karen, and I feel like that is shared amongst a lot of people that are trying to have rational conversations with people. Again, it's just like the gas price conversation from yesterday. I can only do so much for you if you're not willing to admit that prices going up for gasoline as a direct result of Donald Trump is just as egregious as prices going up under Joe Biden for a war that, while he did not start it, he most certainly, I feel like, at least his Secretary of State did, kind of facilitated the movement of that wartime activity at the very least, resulting in the prices going up. I'm going to be playing audio later where people are going to be talking about Biden and say he used the strategic reserve of oil and there wasn't even a crisis. Yes, there was a crisis. There was a war that broke out, man. Like, let's have a real conversation about this stuff here if you want to. But if you're trying to do the partisan garbage, as Karen highlights, it will exist. Jerry says Republican President Richard Nixon called for a windfall tax, profits tax on oil companies in 1973. Funny how some Republican policies from my youth are now branded as socialism. It is funny how that works, is it not? Meanwhile, the sitting president of the United States can take a stake in another American company. Like, the government just gets 15% of the profits from there, and that's not socialism. That's capitalism. But inevitably, a Democrat will win in 2028, and any interest in raising prices will be deemed as socialism again. What's funny is I oftentimes rib the boomer generation for being the welfare generation, given the systems that were in place. If you were listening to the show last week, I haven't pulled the audio. I'm going to have to go back and find the episode and get the audio for you guys. But I've started watching King of the Hill, which I didn't find funny when I was a kid when it was on. Like, it came out in 97, so I was 10 years old. So I'm sitting there watching it when I'm 10, and I'm like, I don't understand why people think this show is any good. And I came across it on Hulu. I've been watching it ever since, and it's freaking hysterical. And there's one scene with an older gentleman. Now, granted, this was in season 2 or 3, so it's 98, 99 at this point, and he's an older gentleman, so he'd probably be a silent generation guy. And he's applying for a job working with the main character. And the main character, Hank Hill, says, "Why do you have all these gaps in your resume?" And he's like, "Well, from this year to this year, LBJ was president and I had access to welfare. This year to this year, FDR was president and I was on welfare. This year to this year, Jimmy Carter was president and I was on welfare." And it was just such a good joke because it ribs at both uh, abundance of welfare under Democratic leadership, which oftentimes leads to excesses, but it also highlights exactly what I've been saying on this show since the beginning, that welfare programs were overly abundant and not necessarily viewed as a negative at that time. And then the same people from that generation and the generation after, i.e. boomers, are trying to convince you that that welfare never existed or didn't benefit them in any kind of meaningful way. It's crazy what life can do for you here. We got another one here. It says, "Oh, come on. Uncle Joe didn't totally bail on us. He gave us the standard 4 or 5% the traditional Democratic Party always has." Well, that's the understatement of the century. And again, I'd take that 4 to 5% right now, given the trajectory that the Republican Party has us on. Again, maintaining the status quo is objectively better than dragging us further away from it. But boy, howdy, would I appreciate just, a third party that's like, instead of maintaining a shrinking middle class and degrading healthcare system and infrastructure system, what if we improve all of that stuff and do it cost effectively and without helping out our buddies? Man, that would be a pleasant change. And Larry says, "And smash that like button." You mean like button, you jerk. But yeah, no, I feel you. I feel you very much. You know what? You know what's funny is I've been told I'm terrible at promoting myself, and I am. I never tell you guys to go to @BenCominos at any of the social medias or to follow my socials or any of that. And technically, I should be all about that. And what's funny is even taking 90 seconds away from content drives me absolutely nuts. I'd rather just take those 90 seconds and complain about something else that bothers me. Case in point, this actually isn't complaining, though. This is a good thing that's happening. I like to bring these to you guys sometimes. We have elections here in Wisconsin, as I've highlighted, and there is an effort to try and speak to Republicans across the aisle in a way that I am not seeing mimicked coming from Tom Tiffany or any Republicans. I'm just going to be frank with you. And it has always befuddled me that Democrats are always like, well, we have to find a way to reach across the aisle. Meanwhile, Republicans can run on, we're going to require passports to vote. We're going to ship all the Mexicans out of here, regardless of criminal status. We'd prefer that women be viewed as property again and not have access to abortion. Meanwhile, liberals have to come out there and be like, I'll increase military funding by 15%. Like, why is it that Republicans don't have to say anything that might accidentally appeal to me as a voter, but Democrats are required to do so? That's an interesting debate to have for another time, but I only have like 7 minutes to get this point across the finish line. So damn it, I'm going to try. Mandela Barnes is running for governor. He currently has an agenda right now of freezing utility rates where they are. Now, I question what that would do to the development of renewable energy projects at different utilities. But as we all know, we are watching stock buybacks go up for a number of these companies, and more importantly, Republicans have killed any effort to invest in renewable energy projects. So there really is no reason for prices to go up until we have a person in charge again who's actually interested in joining the rest of civilization in the future in terms of renewable energy. So Mandela Barnes is coming out saying, elect me as governor. I'm going to make sure these rates don't go up anymore. We have Julliana Bennett, who is running in the southern part of the state to run for state assembly. She is running on lowering the property taxes. Everybody knows that Governor Evers used his line item veto to increase property taxes, and he is allowing for it based on the line item veto for 400 years. What the Republican Party doesn't want to tell you is the reason that he did that is we have been underfunding a number of programs since 2010, that conservative majority with Scott Walker that I've been telling you about, and we've been trying to play catch up since then. Instead of running on just lowering property taxes, much like Tom Tiffany is doing, she's running on paying for those decreases in property taxes by actually taxing the wealthiest people in this country at a reasonable clip, in order to make sure that these programs are funded, but also that the working class is not being dinged by it. Now, I do have some hesitance in that suggestion, and we're going to be reaching out to these people. I had one person text me, when are you going to start interviewing these candidates? I'm getting there. All right. I'm spinning a lot of plates right now, but we're going to talk to these people about that, because as much as I love Wisconsin and I have made it my second home and I'm happy to do radio in Wisconsin, and it's exciting because it's one of the few states where politics actually matters and people are actively engaged. And I'm not just saying that, like, that's real. We actually are a swing state, at least for a little while longer. And the The number of people that can engage in enlightened conversation that don't do this for a living it's absolutely, I love it. It's fantastic. We're not New York City. We're not LA. You can get away with increasing taxes specifically on billionaires in those cities, in those states, because where are you going to go? Where are you really going to go that you're going to match the kind of lifestyle that you can have in New York, or specifically New York, but also LA to a certain extent? You're not gonna. You're just not gonna. And some of you guys are like, it's too bustling there. There's plenty to not like about it. If you're living there, I'm telling you right now, you love everything about it. So where are you going to go if you're a billionaire to replicate that kind of lifestyle? You're not. You're not going to go anywhere. So I think that's an important distinction to make. So when someone in Wisconsin is proposing that, I'm not saying don't tax the wealthiest people among us, but you got to do it in a way that is tactful and that makes sense to people, because there will be pragmatic people out there. But at the end of the day, increasing all of our taxes is a no-go in an affordability crisis. And it goes to show you that she's willing to not only take on this claim that some Republicans want to jump into, but actually showing you how she's going to supplement those funds instead of just getting rid of them altogether. It would be like if Donald Trump won the presidency, the Republicans won the House and Senate as well, and then they passed a massive tax cut for billionaires with no intention to refill those coffers in any kind of way. And now our debt and deficit are absolutely ballooning at record paces as a result of that decision. Now, obviously, that would never happen in real life, because there's no entity that's that stupid to do something like that. But hypothetically, if you guys could imagine an administration that would do something like that, may I point you in that direction? They are waking up to this, and they are running on things that are popular to the American public. We're going to jump into war on the other side, but I also want to keep this conversation alive for at least the first 5 minutes longer, because one U.S. senator is also running on an outlandish tax proposal that I think is a sign of things to come in the elections in 2026 and beyond, and I am not here for it. I'll tell you what I mean on the other side of the break. Download the app. You're listening to Outside the Box with Ben Cominos here on WHBY and Political Voices Network. All right, we're back. Ben Cominos, Outside the Box, WHBY, Political Voices Network. Outside the Box is brought to you by Roush Plumbing and Remodeling, the plumbing and remodeling company the Fox Valley depends on. If you're just joining us, we talked a little bit about the announced retirement of Annette Ziegler from the Wisconsin Supreme Court, not intending to run for re-election in 2027, mirroring the decision of her colleague Rebecca Bradley that ended up choosing to do that this year, which is why we have two new candidates, both a conservative and liberal. Technically, if you're listening not in Wisconsin, there technically is no allegiance in terms of our Supreme Court justices to a political party. But those of us here in Wisconsin know that there is absolutely a political allegiance of the people on our Supreme Court in this state. And that very clearly cuts through for both Democrats and Republicans. They have dealt with Republicans throwing their weight around for the better part of a decade, and it looks like the state is now going to be dealing with liberals throwing their weight around for the better part of a decade. This talk show host is willing to bet that the state's going to remain relatively the same, maybe in gradual decline, just like most other places in America. And one half of the political spectrum is going to act like it's the best thing they've ever seen, and one half is going to act like we may as well just have opened a portal to hell, like in the game Doom, and lather, rinse, repeat until we can do better than this. Probably won't. And then we jumped into a handful of proposals coming from people running for governor as well as for state assembly that actually address affordability, working class concerns in a way that won't leave us high and dry from a budgetary standpoint. Coming out of the Democratic Party. And I do want to focus on one other proposal that I think is a sign of things to come here in this nation. Before I do that, DSL says, I'm skeptical that programs are actually underfunded, but I do believe that when it's free government money, that they are bloated salaries, wasteful spending, and legitimate fraud, all due to a lack of any real oversight. Yet the solution in every situation is to throw more money at the problem, even when the money is not showing positive results. I remember when the city of Appleton was ready to misuse or illegally use a $500,000 grant, even though their plan didn't fit the grant criteria. So then the taxpayers would have been on the hook and they didn't care. I would need more specifics about that. But what sticks out to me, DSL, and what it's always going to come down to between you and I is the largest, strongest middle class expansion in human history was when taxes were high on the highest earners. Was there waste, fraud, and abuse? I'm sure there was. But there were also government programs developed in order to make sure all of us had a pretty equal shot at it. Hell, even healthcare companies, this is a little known fact, weren't operating for profit until the 70s. So, like, I'm not going to sit here and try and convince you that there isn't fraud taking place from all different perspectives in terms of politics here. I am absolutely on board with you there, and I oftentimes use government subsidies as an example. By increasing government subsidies for colleges, but not providing a back end backstop to how much colleges are allowed to charge, all they did was build very fancy dorms and very fancy buildings and then jack the rates up very high. And I use my own college as an example. It costs 70 grand a year to go to that college at this point. Granted, that's a private school, not a public school, so it's not necessarily apples to apples, but the principles still apply. I'm right there with you that some of the best laid plans can go the wrong direction. But what is not up for debate is St. Reagan showed up in the 80s, cut taxes for wealthy Americans, and the middle class has been shrinking and poverty has been increasing for 45 consecutive years. Before that, we were taxing billionaires and the inverse was happening. This is not my opinion. That is the way that it was borne out in reality. And I'm willing to have debates about it, but the debates have to explain to me why the exact opposite of what you're saying directly benefited the entire, well, not entire, minorities were left out, but all of the white people in America directly benefited from these policies for almost a half a century. Then we did the opposite of those policies for a half a century, and we all stagnated. Productivity shot through the roof. Wages stayed basically lateral to what they were 45 years ago. And you need to convince me that cutting these people's taxes even further is going to fix this problem, and that is a very high uphill battle that you're going to have to deal with on me. Larry says we have increased U.S. currency by 400% since 2000. That equates to 400% inflation. Exactly. And what did we print that money for, Larry? Mostly for fighting wars, right? I know you know that, but like, why are we printing this money? We're printing the money because we no longer have access to it. Why do we no longer have access to it? Because we cut taxes for billionaires and we were trying to still keep people on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, etc. So the problems are obvious. To me, the solutions are kind of obvious, but we have a two-party system designed to never do it. And to DSL's point, you go to a liberal state, you go to a California, you go to a New York, and I'll show you a state that has super high taxes, a homeless problem, and an affordability crisis still, because the taxes aren't applied in a meaningful way. Raising taxes and using tax revenue only goes so far unless you're willing to actually apply it in the right directions. And you watch liberal states where the taxes are increased and they're funneled into think tanks and different operations that don't benefit humanity in any kind of meaningful way, and you find yourself with a poverty crisis. Or you go to far right states like Alabama or Arkansas, and you see super low taxes on the highest earners and no social programs and a problem with affordability and poverty. Now, right wing states have more poverty per capita than the blue states do, but it doesn't change the fact that there's poverty everywhere. It's almost like the red states are dragging their citizens further away from an unacceptable status quo, and the blue states are maintaining an unacceptable status quo that results in more and more people struggling to find a way to afford life in those states. It's strange. There really should be a show highlighting that exact feature of a two-party system in America, but that'd be part of you're being partisan when you do that. Anyway, Cory Booker, of all people, who, first of all, can we just say it's adorable that he has aspirations to run in 2028? Can we call that what it is? Adorable. But in order to position himself, he is floating the idea in 2028 for a tax cut for the working class, good, with no intention of supplementing that income in any way, bad. and he's preparing to propose it in 2028. If you haven't seen the details of it yet, he is proposing that we not tax anybody for the first $75,000 that they earn. Obviously, sales taxes still exist. There'd be a handful of others, but in terms of income taxes, from 0 to 75,000, no taxes, and then we go from there. Here's the problem with that. First problem, you do not want to get in a cutting taxes battle with the Republican Party, because if you run on 75,000 and over, they'll say, how about we just cut the income tax altogether? And then all of a sudden you're going to find yourself not attracting any votes, but you will absolutely have detractors like myself who will say, that's great. 75,000, assuming you're getting taxed at, well, let's call it 25% on 75,000. That would be what? 22,500 off of 75,000 would knock you down to 52.5. You'd be clearing $52,500. You'd be saving 22,500 with no taxes. So that is not an insurmountable chunk of change, right? Like that is a stupid amount of money. And the entire social safety net collapses in on itself surrounding that. No more Social Security, no more welfare programs whatsoever, no chance at any kind of Medicare for all or public options. So when you get diagnosed with chemo, when you get prostate cancer and Xtandi, if for the OGs of Outside the Box, when Xtandi costs you $190,000 a year in order to keep your prostate cancer at bay, you let me know what $22,500 is going to do for you. It sounds good on paper, but what you're doing is opening the door for even further tax cuts. And I'm just going to be frank with you guys. We don't need two political parties that are both running on cutting taxes and no political parties that are running on any kind of social spending. There needs to be a difference in the platforms. Now, I am not confused because Cory Booker and Blue MAGA are representative of Bush-era Republicans from the early 2000s. So it doesn't come as a shock to me at all that they would run on something like that. But the fact is, they would rather run on that than taxing their donors. Get every single one of these Mother Hubbards out of office, because I see the writing on the wall. Hopefully, the adults in the room, as liberals like to always say, talk Cory out of this kind of proposal here, because it's only going to open the door to a tax cutoff. And I just spent the last 10 minutes highlighting that tax cuts are what got us into this position to begin with. They most certainly are not going to get us out. Rod says, and Ben, we don't even have to tax them as high as we did back then because we have so many more billionaires that we could get away with a higher percentage. Exactly. Throw it at 45%. I feel like most people would be satiated with what's going on. And more importantly, instead of increasing defense spending to 1.5 trillion, take the extra revenue, pay down the debt and deficit, create a public option, do the things that people claim that they want to see happen every single election cycle, instead of finding ways to burn money in nonsensical ways, sending it to Ukraine, sending it to Argentina, sending it to Israel, whatever the situation is. We're sending it. Keep it in-house and actually do something positive with it. I know. Radical outside the box, but maybe just try that. And with that, that's enough tax talk. You know I can't go a full day without talking the war, or is there even a war anymore? Yeah, there's a war in Iran going on right now. We're going to talk a little bit about Donald Trump's there's a difference between all dead and mostly dead press conference that he did yesterday at 5 p.m. And I want to talk a little bit about the reaction to that speech and the way people are reacting to a lot of the claims coming from the president in general. If you have not seen or heard the Sean McCreesh audio yet, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, but it was phenomenal reporting from the failing New York Times. And I'm absolutely in love with this man right now in the most heterosexual way possible. We're going to play that audio and a couple of claims coming from Fox News surrounding what Donald Trump is saying, plus the press conference itself. All of that is coming up on the other side of the break. So stay right where you are and we'll get into it. Short break here. Don't go anywhere. Outside the Box, WHBY. Brian says exactly. In fact, instead of having an election and spending all the money, let's just take the two that are slinging mud already and get on with it. Did you guys see, since I'm about to pay the failing New York Times some love here, have you guys seen the reporting they did? I don't have it in front of me now, but something like over 20%. It might even be a much larger number than that. Let me see if I just Google it here really quickly while I'm talking. But it's an obscene amount of money coming from like 20 people in terms of election spending, like 20% of people or something like that. I don't know. I can't find it offhand here, but the statistics are mind-boggling at how small the number of people are that are contributing to our voting infrastructure right now. Imagine if they just took that money and applied it to the social programs that existed prior to St. Reagan, and we'd probably have a pretty solid setup right now. But yeah, you're exactly right. I can't take anything away from what you're saying there. That's for sure. Okay. And so with that, I do want to. Oh, and Phil says, as for war talk, I saw something about the Suns investing in drones, more money going to a family for things that while he's doing in office. Oh, 1,000%. And for the record, to Phil and Oshkosh, I remember when Biden was in office and there was an uproar. How are we going to forgive student debts? These people made their decisions. They've made their bed and lie in it. I secretly appreciate watching young people struggle with life crippling debt. Just in Donald Trump's second term alone, he's already canceled $1.5 billion of debt for criminals that he's pardoning. We're talking about people engaging in fraud and other activities that owe the federal government and their victims. He is canceling all of those debts, but those debts aren't going to the working class, so MAGA doesn't seem to be particularly upset about it. As long as Donald Trump, it's the pro-billionaire party. As long as Donald Trump is doing something for billionaires, MAGA's typically mum on it. It's when it's for working class people that they get extra mad. You know, my mom always used to tell me as a kid, people are like crabs in a bucket. And when you try and get out of the bucket, the other crabs are going to try and pull you back in. So you need to rise above that kind of attitude. She would tell me that when I was very, very young. And I still remember it to this day. And that story I just told made me think of that. So that should probably sum up exactly what I think about the people whining and moaning nonstop about student debt reform that have nothing to say about 1.5 billion in fraud debt being forgiven for a handful of billionaires that say nice things about the orange man. With that, let's get into war talk, shall we? Before we get into the press conference in general, or I should say, what was said in the press conference, I would like to take a look at one of the questions that was asked. You may know where I'm going with this already, but it is probably the best asked question I have seen in terms of foreign policy since I have been doing this job. Because and give credit to where credit is due. Donald Trump actually goes in front of the press. Joe Biden very rarely answered any type of actual questions about the genocide in Gaza. He would have his State Department answer it, he'd have his press secretary answer it. You'd watch people getting dunked on. But in terms of people standing their ground, looking a president in the eye and calling them out on their BS, I don't know if there's a better example of this. I've watched the videos myself now. I am by no means a Tomahawk missile expert like so many of my contemporaries are pretending to be right now. But what I do know is that there are only 3 countries that have access to Tomahawk missiles, and I'm going to play that audio for you later. It's not that I even know this, but it's coming from Fox News. But there is very, 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 very little wiggle room in terms of who is actually responsible for the bombing of a school that took the lives of 170 children aged 6 to 12. Also, interesting tidbit, 5 minutes later, they also blew up a gymnasium that took the lives of an entire high school girls volleyball team. Apparently, we were really focused on those terrorist locations. Again, AI is responsible for helping pick out the 1,000 locations that we bombed over the first 48 hours of the operation. Do with that information what you will. But I am now going to play the first person with guts that I have heard in a reporter position for mainstream media in a very, very, very long time.
You just suggested that Iran somehow got its hands on a tomahawk and bombed its own elementary school on the first day of the war. But you're the only person in your government saying this. Even your defense secretary wouldn't say that when he was asked, standing over your shoulder on your plane on Saturday. Why are you the only person saying this?
Because I just don't know enough about it. I think it's something that I was told is under investigation, but tomahawks are used by others, as you know. Numerous other nations have tomahawks. They buy them from us. But I will certainly, whatever the report shows, I'm willing to live with that report.
Damn. That's how you ask that question to a sitting president. Kudos to you. Named Sean McCreesh. Definitely a fan here. Please do not squander my love and adoration. I'm very quick to drop anybody that acts a fool. But that's the kind of question you want to see asked of a president who absolutely engaged in a war crime. Now, you heard in that answer there that some other countries do have access and do fire Tomahawk missiles. It's important to recognize none of those countries are Iran. More importantly, there's not even 5 countries that do it. How do I know this? Well, I turned to Fox News. And on Brett Baer's show, he was interviewing Fox News' national security specialist, Jennifer Griffin, about exactly this. Listen to this back and forth.
I want to bring in Jen Griffin, our national security correspondent. One of the questions, Jen, in that news conference was about the strike on the girls' school that's next to a base in Iran, and it was a Tomahawk missile. The president saying Tomahawks are used by other countries, but an investigation is ongoing. What do we know about where that stands?
Well, that was a bit surprising to me because basically the U.S. has Tomahawks. Tomahawks have to be fired from either submarines or from warships. The Brits and the Australians have Tomahawks, but they're not part of this conflict. And then you also have the Japanese who are in a testing phase. So it seems highly unlikely that it would be anyone's Tomahawk other than a U.S. Tomahawk that hit that school. And I think the president knows that. He just knows that this is certainly a mistake, a big mistake, and it's being investigated, but he's trying to sort of muddy the waters by talking about the Tomahawks.
Yeah, they were saying that they didn't believe it was theirs, or they believed that Iran misfired something. Are we sure that it was a Tomahawk that hit that school?
There's no evidence that the Iranians fired anything at this school. If you look at the satellite imageries, and there've been a lot of investigations from the air, from these satellite photos, showing the impact and showing the likelihood that it was a Tomahawk.
Fairly cut and dry, is it not? It's pretty hard to interpret this in any other way other than the obvious way that it happened. And it's enough to make you sick to your stomach because this war was completely unnecessary. It was completely unavoidable. And just put it in perspective. God forbid something like this ever happens on American soil. But picture the American reaction, because we do this funny thing in America where we dehumanize anybody that doesn't talk or look like us. Picture an elementary school being taken out here in America and the blowback from what that would be and from what that would look like, and the devastation for the families and the community, and watching crying mothers and fathers. That's assuming if they weren't also blown up in the bombing because they struck the school 40 minutes later, taking out anybody who was interested in trying to assist people that may have still been alive from the initial bombing. Picture, we would have a holiday. We would remember that day for the rest of our lives. We would be talking about it a century later, much like we do 9/11. And this administration is trying to play this off like it's just a one and done kind of thing. Like, yeah, well, these accidents happen, but you know what? It was really important to do that so we could kill a handful of powerful people in Iran that almost immediately were replaced with other powerful people in Iran. And they think we're just going to go along with that. And I do want to highlight, listen to Jennifer Griffin's voice right here. Doesn't she sound scared to even say that Donald Trump made a mistake?
And I think the president knows that. He just knows that this is certainly a mistake, a big.
Do you hear it in her voice? Do you hear the consternation to even say the words that the president, and by extension his Defense Department or his Department of War, as they insist on calling it, probably regretting that decision right about now? Do you hear the consternation in her voice as she's prepared to say that? There is very little wiggle room for what took place here. Now, what kind of fallout is there going to be from that? I would hope at the very least there would be a reining in of AI in our Defense Department, because clearly it doesn't know the difference between military targets and schools. I spent a year and a half condemning the Biden administration for providing the weapons that were doing this kind of thing. How do you think I feel now that we know that our own Defense Department is directly responsible for one of the most despicable acts enacted in contemporary war? It's one of the largest massacres of civilians in recent history. And we did it at a time with pinpoint accuracy. Forget about the actual war itself that is pointless and stupid and is absolutely going to be the low point of a very low. It's the low point in a presidency where we also found out that that president was mentioned over 38,000 times on a pedophile ring, in a pedophile ring email chain. And this is somehow lower than that point for him. And that's what this presidency is. I'm disgusted with what took place, and it's becoming unavoidable. And the fact, it should go to show you that not making this a Benghazi, not making this a Hunter Biden's laptop, shows to me that there is an element of dehumanization of the people of Iran. As frustrated as we as voters are by what's taking place. I can't remember if I said it on the show yesterday, if I wrote about it in my Substack blog for yesterday, but there is a video circulating right now of CNN, and in the chyron, it says Democrats in a bind over whether to provide funding for war in Iran. What bleeping bind are you talking about? 8% of the Democratic Party supports what's going on. 70% of the United States population does not approve of what's going on. There is no bind. And CNN would have you believe that there's some kind of internal dilemma or debate about whether or not they should ship another $50 billion to a war that less than a third of the population wants to see, then less than a tenth of your own party's population wants to see. There is no bind. There is the very obvious answer to what to do. And the media doesn't want to portray it that way. And that's why on the leftist networks, you're not seeing the conversation about this school on rerun from now until November of 28. Not to say that you need to politicize the death of children, but I also know with 100% certainty that that is what would be playing on Fox News. If it were white children, of course, not Muslim children. They were probably going to grow up to do jihads or something, according to Fox News. I have no idea. I haven't been paying attention. But for anybody with a conscience, for anybody that is watching this and gets sad, and trust me, as someone who has to watch this, whose job it is to watch this, very unavoidable reality. I don't know how we move on from this. And more importantly, I don't know how it feels like we already have. Paul says, you know what's sad? A terrorist attack on a school would be a national holiday, but if it were done by an American, they would argue that he has gun rights. So Iran can't have weapons, but Americans killing kids in school can. It's a fair assessment. I can't live on the spot take away from anything you just said right there. I've got nothing to add to that. But you're exactly right. Although I will say, if it's little children and it's a bunch of them, we will at least randomly mention it. Although some far right-wing podcasters will call it a false flag to take your guns. But at the very least, Sandy Hook still resonates with some Americans. That might be the last school shooting, and Stoneman Douglas, maybe in Florida, might be the last time that we ever actually talked about anything in any kind of lengthy way. Now we just tune in to find out the identity of the shooter. And if it's a trans, one person runs it up the flagpole. If it's a MAGA, another person runs it up the flagpole. And no one actually cares about the violence anymore. You're exactly right. Jerry just says, I assume the 36K does not include the 3 million redacted pages. It's 38,000, but yes, it does not. It's the ones that we know of that have somehow taken a back seat. And that is the true casualty of this war, is searches for the Epstein files have diminished dramatically since Donald Trump started his war of choice in Iran. but that's another conversation entirely. And then to take this into the realm of the thoroughly unhinged, on Wednesday of last week, I played clips of an interview between me and a retired colonel, George Mason. He battled in the Strait of Hormuz back in 1984. And I asked him to give a recounting of what it would be like as the Trump administration is floating the idea of naval ships escorting business ships in order to make sure that a handful of billionaires that buy our elections are able to continue making that almighty dollar. And if a couple of Navy officers lose their lives, well, that's war, baby. Ask the president. You can go back and listen to that interview if you'd like. It's from Wednesday's episode of last week, about 30 minutes in. I played 2 clips from it where he talks about that. It's retired Colonel George Mason. Brian Kilmeade has a different attitude, if you haven't heard it, towards what the attitude of the Strait of Hormuz should be. And I got to say, I'll agree with him. He can convince me to agree to this sentiment, but only under one condition. He joins everybody for the ride.
I want to bring in Jen Griffin, our national security correspondent.
This is Bush League. That is the clip I just played. Here we go.
If they could get the prices of oil up, that the president would have to draw from the conflict. So just careful, guys.
Right. And he said they should go to strategic oil reserve. That's what Joe Biden did to get prices down without a crisis. The administration announced $20 billion maritime reinsurance plan. So he's saying, hey, guys, even though we get the oil, the market's flush, this is fear, I'm still going to insure your ships. So go through the strait. And, you know, that's just part of it. If you want to diminish the Iranian threat, if you want to make sure that this ends up with complete Iran capitulation, sow some guts and go through that strait and do it.
Okay, so as long as Brian joins them on the boat, I say let's do it. I mean, whatever. He might die, but the product is insured. So it's not like the companies are going to lose any money. So what's the big loss? If anything, I'd call it a net gain in terms of media coverage. I'm joking. But like, seriously, imagine having the audacity to say something like that about what's going on right now, all because Donald Trump decided to embroil us in a war of choice with Iran. We were not threatened by this. And for the record, and I'm gonna at least tease this, and then we'll do this for the last segment. The conversation yesterday, the press conference yesterday, the announcement that it's what was the exact verbiage? Very complete. There's a difference between very complete and mostly complete, as Billy Crystal would tell you. What he's trying to highlight there, what he's trying to do, and I'm going to talk about on the other side of the break whether I even buy what he is saying, but that goes to show you exactly what the polling says, what we've been talking about on this show for 9 days at this point, what is, in my opinion, empirically obvious and very easily discernible. This is an incredibly unpopular war. The prices are going to go up. We've already seen 8 military members lose their lives. There's going to be more casualties. We're over 1,000 casualties in Iran, mostly civilians at this point. There is no net benefit, and they cannot convince, outside of the diest of diehard MAGA, nobody viewed Iran as a threat. Not a single person who can't afford a home or is drowning in credit card, auto, or college debt, or can't find a way to actually afford to have a child in this country, not one of them was going to bed wondering if Iran was going to nuke us. Not one of them was worried about the prospect of Donald Trump's or Iran's potential conflict with Israel. None of us were thinking that. Nobody was thinking that. You can convince some MAGAs that maybe they were thinking about it, but cultists are going to cultist. I can only do so much as somebody that dabbles in reality. Nobody is buying the rhetoric about what is going on in the Middle East right now. So he comes out and does this press conference. Do you guys believe that that is real? Or was this Donald Trump's own mission accomplished George W. style 17 years before the war completed? I'm interested in your thoughts. We'll have about 8 or so minutes on the other side of the break to talk it all up. And as Anna says on my YouTube page, and its children. Like, I think that's a really important thing to highlight here. Just as mad as we were about the children being massacred in Gaza with our money and weapons, but not directly done by us, we now are watching it happen and watching people move on as if it's not that big of a deal, and the president just try and make it up. Thankfully, at the very least, even Fox News doesn't have any wiggle room on this one, which makes it much better. I'm being told as well that the YouTube feed is much better than it was yesterday. So if you're interested in catching the last 8 minutes, the link is available on my Facebook page, or you just go to your YouTube search bar, type at Ben Cominos, all one word, and it'll pop up. Look forward to having you here as well if you want to watch the program as long or listen to it. Either way, we'll do that conversation. Just a couple of minutes here to wrap up the show before Haley comes on. Get your thoughts in as well. 920-281-1150. Message me down the YouTube feed, whatever's convenient for you. We'll try and get some of your thoughts in there too. We'll be back in just a little bit. You're listening to Outside the Box with Ben Cominos here on WHBY and Political Voices Network. All right, we're back. The war is very complete, or is it? I have my skepticism, but who gives a crap what I think? Brian from Fremont's on hold, and we'll go there first. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hey, I just wanted to jump into the March 9th news conference about striking Iran. He was asked why he decided to strike, and he stated he decided to strike when it became his opinion that Iran was preparing to attack first. When asked who advised him on this, he admitted that it was Prime Minister Netanyahu, but the saying of the day is that Steve and Jared and Pete and others have advised me, and I thought that they were going to attack us. So Steve Witkoff, Kirschner, Hegseth are now more important than any documents, any files, anything that has anything to do with intelligence. And so we sit here in the United States scratching our head of why we're at war right now when we have an ineffective Congress, a House, a Supreme Court. It's baffling to me that we're sitting here continuing a war that one person decided.
What sticks out to me about that list of names you mentioned, Brian, is Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner obviously have ties to Israel, and so they have a dog in this fight, making sure that America ends up at war. And then Pete Hegseth is one of those Christian Zionists that believes a massacre of both Jews and Muslims in the Middle East will bring Jesus back to earth. So when you think about the attitudes of all of the people essentially convincing a fairly stupid president to agree to do something like this, it goes to show you that you're exactly right. This isn't even based on intelligence. This is based on vendettas and superstition. And we find ourselves now embroiled. For all we know, maybe we will be out of this by the end of the week. But I'm not particularly confident that that's going to be the case.
I don't see how. I mean, you covered it yourself. If they launched a bomb and dropped it on one of our grade schools and killed 180 students, do you think that MAGA and the liberals or the blue MAGA or whatever the division we have would stay? No, we would be like 9/11 all over again. We would join together. We'd want some kind of a retribution. Well, we've been doing that to the Middle East for 40 years. We've been bombing them. We've been drone striking them. We've been taking out their leaders. I mean, come on, United States. Open your eyes. We deserve what we got from them in 9/11. We deserve the fight that we're going to get right now because we just made a country of 90 million people really mad at us. And if we think we're just going to say, we've had enough, we're pretty silly.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said there, Brian, and I appreciate the call. What sticks out to me, though, is I think this is going to be more of an Israel problem than it's going to be an America problem. I think that's where this is ultimately headed. And will we have the guts? Short answer, no. Will we have the guts to stand up to Israel and be like, look, we can give you some missiles for the foreseeable future, but it looks like you're going to have to make some concessions. I have been trying my damnedest to stay as up to date as possible. I'm just going to be real with you guys. If you read foreign media, it's telling a very different story about Iran's success rate. And I don't mean read Iranian news, obviously, But I'm saying read news from Europe, read news from Israel, read news from a lot of other places that isn't American news. And you might need a VPN to access some of these sources. I'm not saying I use one, but read between the lines. You might need a VPN in order to access some of these. But the reason I don't bring them to you guys is because I don't know what's real and what's fake. The reason we don't get healthcare or college or anything that all the good countries get is because we invest in our defense more than anybody. So it should stand to reason that if we want to reduce you and your schools to rubble, we probably can do so. But I'll tell you guys, I'm reading and watching an entirely different story online than what's being portrayed here. And fundamentally, I want the fighting to end. Fundamentally, if what Donald Trump's saying is true, is they have no more Navy, they have no more Air Force, they have no more means to attack, so he sees no more reason to continue fighting. Wouldn't there be cries from Iran of please stop doing this? We can no longer attack you. Uncle, we don't want to be here anymore. You're not seeing Iran. Maybe it's bluster. Maybe they're putting on a front. But you're not seeing Iran say any of that. You're seeing Donald Trump say, okay, well, they're done. They can't do anything. So mission accomplished. Absolute pun intended. And it's just, me, I'm big on deductive reasoning and using the conversation in front of you to make the most informed decision you can. Does that sound like the attitude of somebody who's winning right now? Because it most certainly doesn't for me. Really quickly, we're going to run through these. Larry says the war in the Middle East and all over the Middle East wars are about investments in the Middle East. The investor should be the one paying for it. That kind of goes to what Brian was saying there, not Jerry just says short-term pain for something or other. Yeah, the propaganda of the year is probably going to be short-term pain, long-term gain. They're coming to trans or kids. Cynthia says the fatalities above included people who lived in the neighborhood. 3 different schools. There's only one school. I've actually seen reporting as high as 4 different schools have been hit, Cynthia, but the one is gaining the most attention. Much like how when the bombing in Gaza was at its height, the Al-Shifa hospital getting bombed, there was a lot of debate over whether or not Hamas did it or Israel did it, even though Israel obviously did it. Then eventually independent journalists showed that Israel, in fact, blew up the Al-Shifa hospital. That was the first hospital of 36 in Gaza. Israel then proceeded to blow up the other 35 hospitals with very little media coverage. Don't you know Israel has the right to defend itself? Please stop questioning this. Democracy's at stake. Phil in Oshkosh says it shows that he has no real grasp on what's going on. Bush was fed the words. There is something true to that. Bush was mostly a product of Dick Cheney. I will say it feels right now as though Donald Trump is a product of Benjamin Netanyahu, and it's pretty difficult to convince me of anything other than that. And what's crazy is that I'm even able to say that kind of thing on any kind of airwaves anymore, because it wasn't too long ago that saying anything like that would immediately get you removed from any kind of media position, because that's anti-Semitic to say that Israel's pulling us into conflicts that we have absolutely no business being involved in. But that's a pretty common attitude these days. With that pleasant note, we're going to have to call it a Tuesday. Download the WHBY app if you didn't get a chance to listen to the entire show. It's also available anywhere you get your podcast. Take me with you on the road, Spotify, Apple Music, whatever the situation may be. I live stream to my personal page that I just created 4 days ago on YouTube. Please do subscribe to that. It's at Ben Cominos. And of course, it will be available on the Political Voices Network at 1 p.m. Central Time today, with a lot more bells and whistles than I know how to do. Go ahead and check it out there as well. Anywhere you want it. We'll be back tomorrow. Haley's up next. Thanks for listening, everybody.